All right, Jackson, go ahead and open the meeting.
Recording in progress.
Good morning, all. Welcome. Thank you for your patience as we worked through some technical difficulties. Going to wait about one more minute to allow the waiting room participants to join. Okay, great. Well, good morning. My name is Mia Shappy with Kearns and West, and I'll be facilitating today's meeting. If you are joining on the live stream today and need to listen in Spanish, please join the Zoom meeting. Thank you all for joining this public meeting for the proposed designation of Kaweah Subbasin as a probationary basin. Today's workshop will be provided in both Spanish and English. If you need to switch your language settings to Spanish, please click on the interpretation globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. From there, a menu will pop up offering Spanish and English audio, Spanish and English. If you select Spanish, please click Mute Original Audio, so you only hear the Spanish translation. The presentation slides are also available in English and Spanish. To display the presentation in your preferred language, click on the View options at the top of your screen. Under Shared Screen, select Presentation in English to see English slides and Presentación en Español to see the presentation in Spanish. Please send any questions via chat to the Zoom host, Jackson Gould, and he'll answer or forward to the appropriate staff. If you're joining from smartphone, you should be able to click on the More button and follow the same steps from there. I will now hand it over to Mark Gutierrez for interpretation.
Thank you, Mia. Muy buenos días a todos, aquellos que nos acompañan en español. Queremos dejarles saber que el taller de hoy se llevará a cabo en ambos inglés y en español y usted tendrá acceso a escuchar el programa en su idioma. Le dejaremos saber cómo. En la parte inferior de su pantalla aparecerá un icono de un globo que dice Interpretation o interpretación. Selecciónelo y de ahí seleccione su idioma Spanish o español. Y ahí podrá escuchar todo el programa en su idioma y puede hasta silenciar el audio original. También puede seleccionar en qué idioma escucha la presentación por medio de ir a la parte superior de su pantalla que dice View Options o ver opciones. Ahí puede elegir la presentación en inglés o presentación en español para poder verlo en su idioma. And just a reminder for those attending in English, please note if there are any comments or questions given in Spanish, you can also hear a live interpretation of it by selecting the globe icon at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation and then selecting English. Thank you so much, Mia. Back to you.
Thank you, Mark. As we work our way through the workshop presentations, please keep in mind that because we are offering the workshop in both English and Spanish, there may be pauses throughout to allow for the interpreters to complete a slide before we can advance. We very much appreciate your patience during these brief pauses. To understand who we have with us today, we've provided a short 3-question participation poll in the chat. There is both an English and a Spanish version. We encourage and thank you to take a few minutes to follow the links and fill out that survey. We're encouraging We're encouraging the following community guidelines. Please rename yourself and provide affiliation if it applies. Engage respectfully and avoid personal attacks, verbally or in the chat. Use chat to communicate comments and/or questions to speakers. Please use the raise hand function and wait until the facilitator calls on you to speak. Please remain muted when not speaking. And during the comment portion, we will go in order of hands raised and may provide a time limit if there are several people who would like to comment. Right, so we're going to go into Zoom instructions and how to engage during this meeting. For online participants, please rename yourself with your affiliation if applicable. You can do this by clicking on the three dots on the top right of your square and select Rename. The presentation and QA portions of this meeting will be recorded, but the comment period will not be. We will be recording notes for the entire meeting. Throughout the presentation, you can use the chat to send comments and questions to the speakers. Even if we are not able to cover them all, they will make it to board staff. During the comment period, you will be able to mute or unmute yourself using the mic icon, as well as turn on and off your video by clicking the camera icon on the bottom left Zoom bar. For phone participants, please use the raise hand function by pressing *9 and unmute or mute yourself by pressing *6. The Q&A will be for clarifying questions regarding content you just learned about the state intervention process. This will allow us enough time to prioritize the comment portion of the call. If we are unable to answer your questions in an effort to prioritize public comments, please include your email address with your question in the chat if you'd like to follow up, if you'd like staff to follow up with you. We ask that you raise your hand by clicking the reaction button, which may look like a heart or smiley face at the bottom of your Zoom bar. We may need to put a time limit on comments depending on how many people are with us today. I will start by calling on folks in order I see your Zoom hand, and we'll list off the name of the person who's on deck, so you're ready to go off mute when the comment before you has finished. All right, you will also be able to send written comments after the workshop, and I will provide more information on that later. Our meeting objectives today are: 1, to provide an opportunity for the public to learn about the draft staff report, which describes the actions staff recommend the State Water Board should take for the proposed designation of Kaweah Subbasin as a probationary basin. To provide an opportunity for the public to interact with State Water Resources Control Board staff and raise questions and concerns. And to provide an opportunity for the public to provide verbal and written comments on the draft recommendation. Today's agenda will include opening remarks from State Water Board Chair Joaquin Esquivel, a background on groundwater and Kaweah Subbasin, an overview of the state intervention under SGMA, plan issues described in the staff report, proposed requirements for groundwater extractors, public Q&A on probationary hearing processes, a presentation from the Kaweah Groundwater Sustainability Agencies, and then we'll go into next steps and public comment. Would now like to hand it over to State Water Board Chair Joaquin Esquivel, who will be providing the opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Mia, and good morning, everyone. My name is Joaquin, and it's an honor here to be joining you. Just on behalf of the board, thank you for your time and your participation in today's discussion. For a number of you, you've likely been tracking and following along the work that's been going on in the Kaweah Subbasin, and for others, this may be your first time engaging with this. And so whichever it may be, we really appreciate your time here. And importantly, hope this discussion and space is a productive one. What we'll go into here soon is a presentation from our staff on the draft staff report. I want to note that I know on June 13th, the Kaweah groundwater agencies resubmitted their groundwater sustainability plans to address concerns that were heard from the Department of Water Resources. And here know that as we continue to engage within the basin, we'll take those updates into consideration. But the presentation you'll see today is based on the previously submitted groundwater sustainability plans. I know that there's a lot of sometimes uncertainty and feeling of lack of clarity of what's going on. So we hope to be just very clear in today's workshop on where we are in our process. Importantly, no decisions are going to be made today. This is truly a forum and opportunity to really hear from you, your concerns, and your reflections on the draft staff report. We'll also have, as we noted here, presentations from representatives from the groundwater sustainability agencies as well. And so appreciate that, what we'll have is an opportunity to have some thorough discussion here. Additionally, we'll also be in person in the basin later this week, Thursday evening, holding a similar community meeting here in person. And as I said, no decisions will be made today. And actually the probationary hearing has, although first noticed for early November, will actually now take place in early January. So we have time, we have space, and importantly, an opportunity to be listening and engaged with you all, and just appreciate, I know there's a lot going on, and your participation here, your engagement is what makes our decision-making process as strong as it can be. So just huge thanks, really appreciate your time here. Appreciate the opportunity to welcome you all and look forward to what I know will be a lot of further discussion here within the basin. Much appreciated. I'll hand things back to Mia.
Thank you so much, Chair Esquivel. I'll now pass it over to Natalie Stork, Assistant Director at the Office of Sustainable Groundwater Management, for staff introductions.
Good morning. I'm Natalie Stork, and I'm here with Angela Kwan and Zach Mayo. We are part of the State Water Board's Office of Sustainable Groundwater Management. We are here today because the board will consider whether to adopt a probationary basin determination for the Kaweah Subbasin in January of next year. Our 5-member board is appointed by the governor, and board members are with us today or watching the live stream on YouTube. No decisions will be made today. Please note that we originally noticed the hearing for November 5th of this year, which is unfortunately the same day as the general election. The date is now changed to January 7th to remove the scheduling conflict and facilitate increased public participation at the hearing. So if you received a hearing notice in the mail or by email, we will be sending an updated notice with the new date, again, January 7th. And now Angela will start us off.
Thank you, Natalie. Hello and good morning. My name is Angela Kwan, and I'm an engineer and geologist with the Office of Sustainable Groundwater Management at the State Water Board. To start us off, I'll be giving some quick context for groundwater management in California and in the Kaweah Subbasin. Groundwater is an essential part of California's water portfolio, with 80% of Californians relying on groundwater for part of their water supply. During average water years, groundwater makes up 38% of the state's water supply, but during times of drought, groundwater makes up 60% of our supply. As you can see in this figure, groundwater is used differently in different parts of the state. The cornerstone of groundwater management in California is that local conditions require local management and solutions with oversight and guidance from state water agencies. California's climate naturally shifts between wet and dry conditions from year to year. During dry years with less rainfall, we rely less on surface water and pump more groundwater to make up the difference. At the time, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which we often refer to as SGMA, was passed into law in 2014. The majority of the state was experiencing exceptional drought, the most severe category of drought conditions. SGMA was passed in order to establish plans for sustainable groundwater management in California for the first time, especially in groundwater basins that were critically overdrafted, which means they have been severely depleted by pumping. The Kaweah subbasin is a critically overdrafted basin in the Tulare Lake hydrologic region of the Southern Central Valley. The main population center in this subbasin is the city of Visalia. Groundwater in the Kaweah subbasin is managed by 3 groundwater sustainability agencies. These agencies include East Kaweah, Greater Kaweah, and Mid Kaweah. The agencies collaborated to write 3 groundwater sustainability plans, which we may refer to as plans, that outline how they will manage groundwater in the subbasin and bring the basin into a sustainable balance by 2040. The original plans were submitted to the Department of Water Resources in 2020, and the Department of Water Resources determined the plans to be incomplete based on 3 deficiencies. The agencies worked to correct the deficiencies, and revised versions of their plans were submitted to the Department of Water Resources in August of 2022. The Department of Water Resources issued a final determination in March of 2023, stating that the groundwater sustainability plans were inadequate and unlikely to resolve the critical groundwater overdraft in the basin. The Kaweah Groundwater Sustainability Agencies provided amended plans to the State Water Board on the 13th of this month. We will talk briefly about these 2024 amended plans later in this presentation, and the GSAs will discuss their amended plans after our presentation. Let's quickly go over what groundwater is. In the simplest terms, we can think of the Central Valley as a large bathtub full of sediments, such as soil, sand, clay, and rocks, with groundwater filling in the spaces between sediments. The saturated sediment layers that hold usable amounts of groundwater are called aquifers. In the Central Valley, different aquifers are separated vertically by clay layers. Rain falling on the land surface infiltrates through the soil and sediments to recharge the aquifers, as do streams carrying snowmelt from the mountains. Shallow groundwater can support vegetation and ecosystems near surface water bodies. Sometimes groundwater contributes to the water flowing in streams and rivers. Humans also pump groundwater to use for drinking water, crop irrigation, and industrial purposes. In the Kaweah subbasin, groundwater is a critical resource for agriculture in particular. In the water year 2022, which spans from October 2021 to September 2022, 91% of groundwater that was extracted was used by the agriculture industry, while 7% was used for urban use, and 2% of the pumped groundwater was used for other purposes. These extraction numbers were reported by the groundwater sustainability agencies in their 2022 annual report. In the Kaweah subbasin, pumping has exceeded the natural and human-assisted recharge that occurs, and groundwater levels have been in decline for decades. Declining groundwater levels have required people to deepen their wells or drill new ones in order to reach deeper groundwater. The extraction of groundwater has caused other problems. This slide displays the results of a dry well susceptibility analysis done by the Department of Water Resources in coordination with the State Water Board. The analysis looked at the declines in groundwater levels during the last drought and predicts which domestic wells would be vulnerable to go dry during a future drought. The darker red colors represent areas with a greater number of domestic wells per block that are at risk of going dry. The lighter colored blocks represent fewer at-risk domestic wells per block. The Kaweah subbasin has 872 domestic wells that are at risk of going dry in a future drought. This map also shows where 34 domestic wells did go dry in 2023. These dry wells are marked on the map as small green circle points and were reported to the Department of Water Resources as part of a voluntary dry well reporting program. In addition to causing dry wells, overpumping groundwater in the Kaweah subbasin has also resulted in land subsidence. Land subsidence occurs when large amounts of groundwater have been withdrawn from certain types of rocks, such as the fine-grained sediments that underlie the Kaweah subbasin. As water is removed from the spaces between the fine-grained sediments, the sediment layers below ground can compact and the land surface can actually sink. Subsidence can negatively impact infrastructure such as canals and levees. Subsidence can reduce the capacity of canals and increase the risk of flood. Subsidence can also cause a permanent reduction in how much groundwater the subbasin can hold. This map displays INSAR data, or satellite data, that the Department of Water Resources compiled for the time period of June 2015 to January 2024. The green color represents up to 1 foot of drop in land surface elevation, while the red color represents 6 to 7 feet of subsidence. You'll see that the southwestern region of the Kaweah subbasin is already experiencing significant subsidence up to 7 feet. To the east, the Bryant-Kern Canal area has sunk several inches in the Kaweah subbasin. Subsidence has the potential to cause significant loss in water conveyance capacity in the Bryant-Kern Canal, which delivers drinking water to over 250,000 people and delivers irrigation water to over 1 million acres of farmland. Now, Natalie will talk about the state's role in this basin.
Now that Angela has talked about some of the issues in the Kaweah subbasin, I'm going to talk about the State Water Board's role in implementing the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and what that could mean to this area. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act recognizes that groundwater is a resource that needs to be managed sustainably so that it is available for people to use in the future. Many basins in California are overdrafted, meaning that more water is being pumped out than being replaced through natural processes. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act requires that 94 basins in California manage their groundwater sustainably. As Angela mentioned before, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act required the formation of new local agencies who are responsible for writing and implementing plans to manage groundwater. The law required the Department of Water Resources to develop a framework for these plans and for the Department of Water Resources to determine whether these plans are adequate. If the Department of Water Resources decides that any plans are not sufficient for managing groundwater sustainably, the State Water Board is the backup plan and steps in to help basins get back on track. So what is sustainability? Sustainability means the basin is operated within its sustainable yield and doesn't experience undesirable results, which are significant and unreasonable occurrences of these 6 things caused by groundwater conditions occurring throughout the basin. What's important is that sustainability is supposed to be determined by locals at the local level. Note that agencies don't have to address groundwater issues already occurring before 2015. The law focuses on 2015 conditions. The law focuses on conditions from 2015 forward. The law recognizes that where groundwater is not being managed sustainably, the state should step in to protect groundwater resources until local agencies are ready to manage it on their own. Now, focusing in on the board's role, here are a few key things to remember. The board only steps in when local efforts fail. We can't just step in whenever we want to. The board temporarily protects the basin until locals come up to speed. Board actions are not a replacement for a groundwater sustainability plan. The backstop is triggered by deadlines and deficiencies, which is why we are here today. This is the State Water Board's state intervention process. First, there is a trigger. In this case, it's the plan not being adequate. When the board considers whether probation is warranted. This is where we are now. Then the board considers whether to put the basin on probation. If the basin is put on probation, then there is a period of at least 1 year to fix issues. If issues are not fixed, then the board can decide whether to adopt its own plan for the basin. At any time, if agencies think they have fixed their issues, they can provide a new plan or plans to the board for evaluation. If the plans are fixed, we can move the basin out of state intervention and back to the Department of Water Resources oversight. If a basin is put on probation, first, the board identifies the problems with the plan. Then, agencies work during this time to fix issues while implementing the good parts of their plans. Many people who use groundwater will need to begin reporting how much they pump so that the board can assess conditions. The board may require meters so that we get accurate information. The board must also begin charging fees. The law states that the board must recover the costs of administering the program. These are not meant to be punitive. Here's a bit more on extraction reports. Reports must be submitted annually. Reports must include where the well is located, how much it can pump, how much is actually pumped on a monthly basis, where the water is used, and what it's used for. Reports must be filed online. Here are our fees that are charged for each required report. We have a base filing fee of $300 per well. Also, a volumetric fee, which for probationary basins is $20 per acre foot. There is an automatic late fee of 25% per month up to a cap. And a few additional notes. Fees are subject to change. The board can also require special studies that may incur additional costs. Waivers are available to certain pumpers, such as people with low incomes and community water systems serving disadvantaged communities if they report on time. Note that most domestic well owners will likely not have to report or pay fees. Back to our process slide. First, we've discussed probation. Now let's discuss what happens if plans aren't fixed. After at least a year, the board can develop and adopt its own plan for the basin. This plan will have corrective actions, monitoring to see how the actions are working, a schedule for the corrective actions, and enforcement to ensure the plan is followed. The important thing is that this plan is meant to be temporary, so it won't include new groundwater recharge or water treatment facilities. It would likely be focused on cutting back pumping. We hope that it doesn't get to this point. The goal is to get this basin and others back on track before we need to get to this. Now, I'm going to hand this over to Zach to talk about the draft staff report.
Thank you, Natalie. Hello, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Zach Mayo. I am a senior engineering geologist with the State Water Board. Staff of the State Water Board make recommendations to the board members regarding subbasins with inadequate plans. At this point, Angela and I will present an overview of staff's draft recommendations for the Kaweah subbasin. The information we are presenting is based on the 2022 groundwater sustainability plans. Board staff would like to recognize that the Kaweah groundwater sustainability agencies have submitted revised groundwater sustainability plans. After we conclude our presentation, the Kaweah agencies are going to discuss the deficiencies as identified by the Department of Water Resources, as well as board staff, and how their revised plans address the deficiencies. Board staff are committed to reviewing the revised plans and will be working with the Kaweah agencies to address issues where necessary. Board staff would like to acknowledge the positive momentum the agencies have gained on improving the plans and working towards maintaining local control. Having the agencies present and participating in this workshop is a testament to this. For now, we are hoping to learn more from this virtual workshop and the in-person workshop on the 27th. We intend to update the draft staff report with the comments we receive at these workshops and from the comments we received during the public comment period. Based on the 2022 plans, we, the staff, not we, the board, recommend to the board that they designate the basin probationary. However, as I just mentioned, the groundwater sustainability agencies have submitted revised plans on June 13th, and our recommendation may change if the agencies have made substantial progress in addressing the deficiencies. Staff are currently prioritizing review of these new plans. Once the review is complete, staff will update their recommendation. Staff initially recommended probation in the draft staff report because the 2022 plans, as written, would allow substantial impacts to people who rely on wells for drinking water by causing wells to go dry or become contaminated. This even includes some people who rely on public water systems for drinking water, as the plans would impact some wells used by public water systems. The plans would allow substantial impacts to critical infrastructure due to land subsidence or the sinking of land due to pumping. There would be significant impacts to water quality and potential depletions of interconnected surface water. Moreover, and importantly, the 2022 plans will not achieve groundwater sustainability by 2040, as they currently allow overdraft to continue beyond 2040. Again, State Water Board staff want to acknowledge here that the Kaweah agencies have already begun working to correct these deficiencies. They have been meeting regularly with board staff, and they have made progress towards addressing some of these deficiencies. Until we thoroughly review the revised plans, the state's evaluation will be based on the plans adopted in August of 2022. It is crucial that we clearly define the deficiencies in the 2022 plans so that we can assure that they are fully addressed in the next adopted plans. If the board decides to designate the basin probationary, the board must also identify the deficiencies with the plans and the potential actions for correcting those deficiencies. The potential actions for each deficiency we will cover today are described in detail in the Kaweah draft staff report. Now, before Angela and I dive into the deficiencies, I'll describe generally how groundwater sustainability plans work. In general, these plans describe groundwater conditions, which describe the basin, sustainability criteria, which provide clear metrics for agencies to evaluate their management and determine if they are on track to achieve sustainability and if they are avoiding undesirable results. Monitoring, which is how agencies measure how the basin is progressing towards its goals. The plans describe what is being monitored, like groundwater levels or groundwater quality, where it is being monitored, and how often. Projects and management actions, which are the steps agencies take to achieve sustainability. These might include projects that bring in new surface water supplies or rules that restrict pumping. When the Department of Water Resources reviewed the Kaweah Subbasin plans, the department found problems with how the agencies plan to manage declining groundwater levels and land subsidence. Board staff agree with the department's review, and the draft staff report describes significant deficiencies related to these two categories. In addition to the department's deficiencies, board staff have also identified additional deficiencies. Board staff have identified deficiencies with how the agencies plan to manage for water quality degradation, specifically how groundwater management can cause pollutants in water to reach levels that are less safe for drinking, irrigation, or other purposes, and problems with how the agencies plan to manage depletions of interconnected surface water. If groundwater levels decline deep enough, some surface water bodies and their habitats would be significantly transformed and harmed. The Kaweah Groundwater Sustainability Agencies have submitted revised plans that discuss the department's inadequate determination and how they are addressing those deficiencies. However, the plans do not address board staff's additional deficiencies. As stated previously, board staff are in the process of doing a red flag review of the revised plans. Board staff will continue to work with the Kaweah GSAs to address all deficiencies. Now, Angela will describe these proposed deficiencies in more detail.
Thank you, Zach. Overpumping causes groundwater levels to decline. This means that wells must be drilled deeper to reach groundwater. Declining groundwater levels threaten drinking water supplies by drying up wells completely or reducing the amount of water that wells can pump. Domestic drinking water wells are at highest risk because they are relatively shallow, but even deeper wells, like public supply wells or agricultural irrigation wells, can be impacted. Deeper groundwater levels increase the cost to repair or replace impacted wells or to drill new wells. Deeper groundwater levels can also increase the energy cost to pump groundwater for wells that are deep enough to continue pumping at declined groundwater levels. This all means that deeper groundwater levels generally increase the cost of water for everyone. Moreover, declining groundwater levels can cause subsidence, degrade groundwater quality, and can deplete interconnected surface water, each of which cause their own set of problems, which will be explained later in this presentation. Now, I will go over some of the deficiencies identified by board staff regarding how the 2022 groundwater sustainability plans handle groundwater level management in the subbasin. The 2022 plans do not sufficiently describe the impacts that the agencies are trying to avoid. The plans should discuss the substantial increase in costs to pump at deeper groundwater levels, or how many existing wells may go dry under the management plans. Without clearly defining the undesirable results, the agencies will not be able to tell whether their plans are working. The 2022 plans, as written, would allow for significant and unreasonable impacts to groundwater wells. The plans would allow about 2 in 5 domestic wells and at least 50 public supply wells to go dry. The plans do not describe how groundwater level thresholds would impact subsidence, degradation of groundwater quality, and depletions of interconnected surface water. Finally, the 2022 plans mention developing a well mitigation program, but lack sufficient details in how domestic well owners and water supply providers would be supported if their wells go dry due to groundwater management. Board staff would like to note that we have had meetings with the Kaweah groundwater sustainability agencies regarding well mitigation plan development and implementation, and board staff are encouraged by the direction of the Kaweah agency's progress. The Kaweah agencies submitted a sub-basin-wide mitigation program along with mitigation plans for each of the 3 agencies on the 13th of this month. And board staff are reviewing the mitigation program and plan documents along with the 2024 amended groundwater sustainability plans. Now, Zach will talk about the plan's deficiencies regarding managing land subsidence.
Thank you, Angela. As discussed, subsidence is the sinking of the land surface due to declining groundwater levels. Like the lowering of groundwater levels, subsidence can also have potential consequences. Subsidence can reduce the carrying capacity of gravity-driven water conveyance. This means that surface water deliveries, rivers, and canals carry less water and therefore increase the risk of flooding. For example, although the Friant-Kern Canal has not experienced significant subsidence here, even the sinking of less than a foot may cause changing in carrying capacity, and repairing the carrying capacity is often very expensive. Subsidence could also damage wells and reduce access to water. It could damage other infrastructure such as roads, utilities, and pipelines. It can also cause irreversible damage to groundwater aquifers and lasting damage to aquatic ecosystems. I will now go over some of the key issues identified by board staff regarding how the 2022 plans handle subsidence in the subbasin. The plans do not clearly describe the undesirable result, which is what agencies are supposed to prevent. Without this, the agencies won't be able to tell whether the plans are working. For example, the plans should explain the methodology or how it was determined that approximately 10 inches or greater amount of subsidence would result in a 10% or more capacity loss in the subbasin's conveyance infrastructure. The plans do not adequately explain what impacts would be caused by subsidence and what impacts would be caused by declining groundwater levels. The draft mitigation plans submitted in the groundwater sustainability plans do not provide sufficient details on how conveyance infrastructure would be supported if they are impacted by subsidence. Now, Angela will talk about the plan's deficiencies regarding the degradation of groundwater quality.
Zach. As groundwater levels decline, groundwater quality can also degrade. The degradation of groundwater quality can result in poor drinking water quality. This may cause health problems, including chronic diseases such as kidney and liver cancer that may eventually result in death. Degraded groundwater quality can also cause foul odor and taste in water, and degraded groundwater quality may result in irrigation water that is not suitable for crops. Another potential consequence is that water quality treatment may be difficult and very expensive. Lastly, water quality degradation may require people to find alternate sources of water. For example, people whose water quality has been degraded may have to rely on tanks of water hauled to their houses until wells can be replaced or until they can be tied into an existing public water system. It is important to note that there are other causes of groundwater quality degradation that are outside a groundwater sustainability agency's control, and the State Water Board does not expect the Kaweah agencies to prevent these problems. To that end, the State Water Board has identified issues with how the 2022 groundwater sustainability plans address groundwater quality degradation within agency control. Key groundwater quality deficiencies that board staff have identified are the following. The 2022 plans do not clearly describe the conditions the basin is trying to avoid. The plans indicate that conditions would be unacceptable only if they were caused by groundwater pumping or recharge projects. However, groundwater quality problems are complex, and the plans do not provide enough details about how agencies could determine whether groundwater quality degradation is caused by groundwater pumping or recharge. The 2022 plans use a 10-year running average to track groundwater quality constituent exceedances, and board staff note that using a 10-year running average may allow for drinking water to degrade substantially below drinking water standards before being considered an undesirable result. This may lead to delayed management or mitigation of degraded groundwater quality. The plans set agricultural water quality standards to drinking water wells in agricultural areas. This means that water quality in domestic wells could degrade below drinking water standards without being considered an undesirable result. The 2022 plans do not demonstrate that the monitoring networks for water quality allow the agencies to monitor impacts to domestic drinking water wells. The plans use public supply wells to represent drinking water wells. Public supply wells are often deeper than domestic wells, and as a result, the groundwater quality readings in public supply wells are likely not representative of conditions in shallow domestic wells. In addition, the 2022 groundwater sustainability plans do not provide sufficient details in how domestic well owners would be supported if their wells experience degraded groundwater quality due to groundwater management. Now, Zach will speak to depletion of interconnected surface water.
Once again, thank you, Angela. And thank you to everyone for your continued patience. Interconnected surface water refers to surface water, like streams, rivers, or other water bodies, that is hydraulically connected to groundwater. This means that the area beneath the water body, but above groundwater, is fully saturated. This area has profound impacts on habitat and wildlife. For example, vegetation in an area with interconnected surface water does not need deep roots to access water. The interconnection increases surface water flows, so there is more water available for aquatic wildlife. As groundwater levels decline, the interconnected area gets smaller. And if groundwater levels decline too much, it goes away entirely. So the depletion of interconnected surface water can have profound impacts. It can substantially transform or harm habitat and wildlife. Without interconnected surface water, vegetation without deep roots may not be able to access enough water, and reduced surface flows may be inadequate for existing aquatic wildlife. Depletions of interconnected surface water therefore substantially threaten recreations like fishing or hunting. Moreover, the reductions in surface flow don't just harm habitat and wildlife, it also reduces the surface water available for human use. Regarding deficiencies, board staff identified a few deficiencies concerning how the plans manage the depletions of interconnected surface water. Here are the deficiencies. The plans do not thoroughly describe potential impacts and what those potential impacts might have on beneficial uses and users. The plans allow for 50% of surface water depletions in select waterways due to groundwater extractions. When assessing depletions of interconnected surface water, The plans are not supported by the best available information, the best available science, or a model that quantifies surface water depletion when assessing for the depletion of interconnected surface water. Lastly, the plans do not establish a monitoring network designed to address depletions of interconnected surface water. And now I will pass it back to Natalie. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Zach. In addition to the deficiencies noted above, staff have additional recommendations to the board. Now I'm going to go over recommended requirements that would apply to groundwater extractors in the staff report. If the board puts the basin on probation, staff recommend excluding household domestic well users from reporting and fees. The law does this by default, but gives the board flexibility to include domestic well users in some circumstances. We recommend that the board stick with the default and exempt household domestic well users. For those who do have to report, staff recommend moving the default reporting deadline forward 2 months to December so that we can get necessary information sooner in case we need to write our own plan. Staff recommend that anyone who pumps 200 acre-feet or more per year from the basin install a certified meter so that we can get accurate data. While the Tulare Lake and Tule subbasins had recommendations for anyone who pumps 500 acre-feet or more, this recommendation of 200 acre-feet or more for the Kaweah subbasin should cover most of the groundwater pumped from this basin. Staff recommend that anyone who pumps from the wells located in the Friant-Kern Canal Band, which is 1 mile on either side of the canal, install a certified meter so that we can get accurate data on pumping near the canal. The law allows the board some leeway to exclude areas of the basin from probation. Since all 3 plans for the basin were determined inadequate, we recommend any probationary determination apply to all 3 plans. That concludes our presentation on recommendations in the draft staff report. Next, I'll walk through the schedule leading up to a hearing. Here's the schedule. On May 6th, we released the draft staff report and issued the hearing notice to cities, counties, our mailing list, and the Department of Water Resources. On May 7th, we mailed the notice to all known pumpers. Our public comment period runs from May 6th to July 8th. Today is our first stakeholder meeting, and we are holding our second stakeholder meeting in Visalia on June 27th, this Thursday. We will review all public comments submitted by the deadline and use this information to revise our draft staff report and potentially the recommendations within the report. We plan to release the final staff report in December of 2024, this year, along with the draft resolution for the board to consider at the hearing. The hearing is scheduled for January 7th, 2025, next year, where the board will consider a probationary determination for the basin. Now I will hand it back to Mia.
Thank you, Natalie, Angela, and Zach. Thank you for that presentation. We are now moving into the question and answer portion of the workshop. This time is for you all to ask clarifying questions regarding the content you just learned about the state intervention process. We will be accepting questions via the chat, and State Water Board staff member Kelsey Thompson-Briggs will be directing the questions to the proper staff member. Depending on the number of questions, We may or may not be able to respond to all before transitioning to public comment. However, all of your questions will be noted. As a reminder, interpretation services are being offered for today's virtual meeting. So to listen to any comments or questions given in Spanish, please hit the globe or interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select English. You'll be able to hear a live rendering of the comment in English. I will now open the floor to any comments or, any questions in the comment section.
Thanks, Mia. Our first question that came through the chat says, we raise FFA and 4-H animals and have less than 2 acres. Will this have an impact on us? I'm gonna send that question to Natalie.
Thank you for that question. As stated in the staff presentation, I'll start by just reiterating that. So the default exemption in the law, which the staff recommend the board stick with, is that there's an exemption from reporting and therefore fees for individuals who pump, specifically it's for 2 acre-feet or less per year for domestic use only. And an acre-foot is the amount of water that would be spread over an acre 1 foot deep. And there's a conversion from gallons that you can look up. If you need any help with determining how much water you pump, please feel free to reach out to the State Water Board staff via email and we'll share resources with you. So that exemption is for, again, 2 acre-feet or less for domestic use only. For people who are raising animals, if it's for your own use, that can be considered domestic use. For the specific situation of raising animals for Future Farmers of America or 4-H, please follow up with us regarding whether or not that would be considered domestic use. In a situation where animals are sold commercially, that would not meet the criteria for the exemption. Also, for individuals who are required to report and pay fees, many individuals may still be eligible for a fee waiver depending on income. So please see our website for more information on those fee waivers, and or please feel free to reach out and email us.
Thank you, Natalie. We have another question which asks, how similar are the Kaweah Basin inadequates to the Tulare Lake? So I think it may be asking about the similarities and deficiencies that are recommended by staff between Kaweah and Tulare Lake.
So our staff look at each basin individually, reviewing those groundwater sustainability plans. Looking, of course, at DWR's deficiencies, the Department of Water Resources deficiencies that they noted in their staff report, but also taking a look at the basin as a whole in light of the laws and regulations that must be followed for these. Many of these basins do have similar issues, so you may note some similarities amongst the deficiencies, but it's not exactly the same by any means.
Oop. You are muted, Kelsey.
Thank you. Just a process question here. Will the staff be rewriting the report to reflect the new GSPs, groundwater sustainability plans, before the hearing? Will the money collected from pumping fees be used to help the groundwater sustainability agencies come into compliance, or will they only be used for writing an interim plan?
Thank you. Regarding the first question, will staff be rewriting the report to reflect the new GSPs before the hearing? So for that one, staff are already working now to review the revised GSPs. Any public comments we received during the public comment period, staff will be reviewing and considering whether to change the recommendations in the staff report. Since we received the groundwater sustainability plans more than 5 months prior to the hearing, which is how long we anticipate we will need to review them, we will be doing our best to do a full review. And we will likely be editing the staff report in some way to reflect that. Again, every situation is different. Every basin is different. But in the Tulare Lake staff report, we added an appendix where we did a write-up of the public comments received and whether or not the staff report was changed to address them. We may do something similar or something different in this case, but our staff are working now to review these groundwater sustainability plans. The second question, will the money collected from pumping fees be used to help GSAs come into compliance, or will they only be used for writing an interim plan? The fees collected in a situation where a basin is put on probation are because the statute requires the State Water Board to recover the costs of its program. Any fees collected will be used to administer the program. That could, it funds the program. The program in part meets with groundwater sustainability agencies and does a range of work, including potentially writing interim plans. But again, there's a period of at least a year for GSAs to resolve issues after a basin is put on probation before the board can move towards adopting an interim plan. So the fees are generally for administering the program. I will share that our goal is to get all of the basins back on track. And so regardless of the fee collection, staff will be working with the GSAs to try and make that happen in any situation where a basin's put on probation. For example, we could potentially share that reporting data, or we will share the reporting data that we collect to help GSAs better understand the situation.
Thank you. We have a couple logistical questions about this workshop that I can cover. Somebody asked whether this current question and answer period is also the time for public comment. So the quick answer is no. Just to clarify, we will have a separate public comment portion. And so this section is really for clarifying questions from the staff presentation that you just heard. And then we will be making sure to save time at the end of the meeting to hear your public comments. So stay tuned for that. And then we also got a question asking how many local constituents we expect on Thursday in Visalia and whether the format of this of that meeting will be the same to this meeting. We don't know exactly how many people to expect. We're certainly hoping to have as many members of the public there as possible, and would encourage you to spread the word to folks that in the area who may be interested. The format will be very similar to this meeting. Same presentation from staff and from the local agencies as well as having a brief Q&A and a longer opportunity for public comment. So hope to see some of you in person as well.
Okay, thank you, Kelsey. And thank you, Natalie, for answering those questions.
And we do have, I think, one more question if we have time, Mia.
I think we have 1 more minute, so go for it.
Okay, we'll end with this one. How many additional State Water Board staff is added once a basin receives probationary status?
To answer that one, the State Water Board has the Office of Sustainable Groundwater Management, and we are the ones, the staff who are responsible for doing all of this work under the scope of implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act of the State Water Board. we don't add a specific number of staff in that particular situation.
Thank you for clarifying. Over to you, Mia.
Thank you. Right, we are waiting for the GSA presentations to get set up. Looks like they are looking good. So we will now be moving to a presentation from the Kaweah GSAs. The GSA submitted a new GSP, and considering this update, the State Water Board wanted to allow space for you all to hear from the GSAs themselves on their most updated plans. We will be hearing from representatives from the Greater Kaweah GSA, East Kaweah GSA, and Mid Kaweah GSA. If you have any questions about the presentation you're about to hear, please direct them via email to Kate Pallas. We will have her contact information in the chat. So I will now hand it over to Mark Larson, General Manager of the Greater Kaweah GSA.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for attending and participating and caring about the future of the Kaweah Subbasin. It's great to see so many faces, familiar faces on the attendees list, as well as a lot of new names. We're looking for good attendance on Thursday as well. Thank you, State Board staff and State Board members for allowing this panel presentation, as we're excited to present our work in the subbasin. Although we have a lot to cover in 30 minutes, a reminder to our presenters to watch your speed, allowing for interpretation. Presenting today from the Kaweah Subbasin is Aaron Fukuda, Interim General Manager for the Mid Kaweah GSA, Michael Hagman, Executive Director for the East Kaweah GSA, Abhishek Singh, PhD Professional Engineer from Intera, Kate Pallas, Water Resources Scientist from Intera, Derek Williams, Principal Hydrogeologist from Montgomery and Associates. Next slide. Our presentation today will consist of 4 items: our sustainability strategy, the recent revised GSPs that address DWR's deficiencies, how we are in the process of addressing the State Board new deficiencies identified in the letter and the draft staff report, and finally, our continuing path to reach sustainability. Next slide. Aaron, could you take the presentation?
Yeah, thank you, everybody. So next slide, please. So we want to start our conversation with where the Kaweah Subbasin started their implementation process. And that was really with an emphasis on accelerating our project's management actions and mitigation to balance the impacts to our beneficial users, uses, and property interests. So what we did is we accelerated really our demand management as a priority, and we'll discuss that a little bit later, supported by projects that feed water to reduce demand management. And in the event we lose or have impacts on some of our most critical users, which are our shallow domestic wells, we needed to implement a mitigation process to help those folks. Next slide, please. So demand management, as we said, is a key element in our sustainability path. I want to note that when you see items in our presentation in green or have these green check marks, those are projects management actions or policies that are already in place and are being implemented. Next slide, please.
I'd like to remind Aaron to slow down just a bit, and then to allow for interpretation, they'll switch the slide when interpretation is done.
Okay.
Okay.
So a cornerstone of our management actions is the demand management and carried out through our water dashboard. The water dashboard allows landowners at the parcel level to see their surface, groundwater, and precipitation use. We've also incorporated new tools like our water marketing strategy that's now up and running as a pilot that has disadvantaged community and environmental protections. And we're looking to the future to implement new tools like cropping tools and other agronomic tools. Next slide. It's important to note that we've seen the positive benefits of our demand management or allocation policies. The tiered pricing structures have incentivized land fallowing and repurposing. And some of our early results are found in the East Kaweah GSA, where 5,000 acres of land has already been fallowed, and in the Mid Kaweah GSA, where in 2021 to 2022, we saw a 13% reduction in consumptive use, which was during that drought period related directly to groundwater use. Next slide. What's important to note is that the Kaweah Subbasin GSAs understand the pros and the cons of an allocation or demand management policy. Pros are we achieve sustainability and long-term water security under climate change. But on the con side, we look at the economic impacts to our local communities, the culture of our community being agriculture and the impacts there, and then really the impact on our small family farms and what those folks are feeling. Next slide. So to help describe our next element of sustainability is Mike Hagman to talk about projects.
As you can see, many projects have been completed or underway. These projects bring in additional surface supply on years where there is abundance, and they don't replace the drafting of groundwater. It takes some time for that water to get into the ground, but it will assist us in our long-term objective of reaching sustainability. Next slide. Private and public agencies have each spent money, resources to accomplish adding more supply to our subbasin. It's imperative to remember that these projects will take wet years such as 2023 or other years and bring that supply in and store it in the basin to help us reach our sustainability. And we've done a lot of that in the past 2 years. Some programs, such as the land fallowing programs or multi-benefit land repurposing programs, actually remove ground from groundwater pumping, and they help in us achieving our objective of sustainability by 2040. Next slide. Mitigation is an interim method of protecting beneficial uses and users. We do this through programs or plans that address the issues that are caused by overdraft of groundwater in the subbasin. More of that will be talked by Kate and further along in the presentation. Next slide. Now, want to be very clear that our primary objective is sustainability by 2040 or sooner. Our reduced groundwater extractions through the allocation process is going to get us there. Projects will help us recover groundwater to measurable objectives. Next slide. Now we'll turn the time over to Abhishek Singh to address the DWR deficiencies.
Thanks, Mike. As Zach and Angela mentioned, the Kaweah Subbasin's draft revised GSPs were released for public comment a few weeks ago. These versions address all of DWR's deficiencies, which were actually very similar to several issues identified by the State Board staff report. We are working on addressing additional comments from the State Board staff report in our final GSP submittal. This presentation today will only focus on how we've addressed the DWR deficiencies. Next slide. So this slide shows the guiding principles. Actually, if you could go to the previous slide, the pyramid. Sorry about that. So this slide shows the guiding principles or priorities that were the basis for the development of all sustainable management criteria. To summarize, the revised GSPs use a regional, basin-wide, consistent quantitative framework relying on extensive stakeholder feedback and using the best available data and science to develop the revised sustainable management criteria that are protective of beneficial use, even more so than the previous GSP. Next slide. This slide outlines the steps that were followed in the development and the revision of all sustainable management criteria. All SMCs start by defining beneficial use and users. We then qualitatively define what constitutes significant and unreasonable impacts. And for all SMCs, the significant and unreasonable impacts refer to the tipping point when impacts on beneficial use and users become too significant for us to address them through projects or management actions or through mitigation. We next evaluate groundwater conditions that lead to those impacts, define quantitative undesirable results, which is a statutory requirement under SGMA, and develop sustainable management criteria that prevent those undesirable results from occurring. It's important to note that all our sustainable management criteria are internally consistent. For example, the water level, minimum thresholds, and measurable objectives speak to the subsidence minimum thresholds and minimum objectives. Next slide. So stakeholder input has been foundational to this process. Local control is the core of SGMA. So in keeping with that, the Kaweah Subbasin has developed an extensive stakeholder engagement framework. We have several technical advisory councils and advisory councils, including a diverse set of stakeholders, growers, NGOs, municipal entities. Just to give you an example, to date, we have had 108 meetings, and we continue to have these meetings as we move forward with additional GSP updates and implementation. Next slide. So Zach and Angela have already mentioned the various deficiencies that were identified by DWR. So we've parsed it into four aspects of our presentation today. The first aspect is going to cover water levels. Then we're going to talk about our mitigation program, which of course relate to water level impacts. We will then move into the sustainable management criteria for subsidence. We will connect subsidence with water levels, and finally talk about the consistency between the water level and subsidence minimum thresholds. Next slide. So, all right. With respect to water levels, it is important to understand that the Kaweah Subbasin consists of two aquifers. There is an upper unconfined or semi-confined aquifer and a lower aquifer primarily below the Corcoran clay in the west. For the upper aquifer, the most vulnerable beneficial users are shallow domestic wells. So our sustainable management criteria were established to be protective of shallow domestic wells so that they were inherently protective of all other beneficial use and users. So while we'll be focusing on domestic wells, it's important to understand that we have also looked at impacts on all other beneficial use and users and are being protective of those. For the lower aquifer, our analysis and modeling shows that subsidence is the limiting factor. If we are able to prevent any new subsidence from happening from the lower aquifer, we're also going to keep water levels at levels that protect against any impact on deep aquifer, lower aquifer beneficial use and users. And my colleague Derek Williams will be covering how we've developed water levels for the lower aquifer. So my focus is going to be on the upper aquifer water levels. Next slide. So for the upper aquifer water levels, what we are looking at here is the quantitative definition of undesirable results. As you can see, undesirable results for the upper aquifer would occur if more than 17 upper aquifer representative monitoring sites in the Kaweah Sub-basin would exceed their minimum threshold, and we have any more than 30 domestic wells in the Kaweah Sub-basin impacted or potentially going dry due to overdraft conditions requiring mitigation. And then finally, we also link the undesirable result to the GSA's ability to mitigate those impacts. So not only are we accounting for exceedance of minimum thresholds at monitoring wells, we're also accounting for potential impacts and the GSA's ability to address those impacts. What's important to note is that with these revised minimum thresholds, the number of domestic wells that may be potentially impacted under our minimum thresholds are significantly lower than the previous GSPs. So to summarize, the 30 domestic wells in a given year represent less than 1% of domestic wells in the Kaweah Sub-basin. And cumulatively over the GSP implementation period, this would represent about 10% of domestic or drinking water wells in the basin. Next slide. We use best available data and science, very similar to DWR's dry well susceptibility guidance document, those results that Angela presented. So we have used very similar analysis to look at potential dry wells in the Kaweah Sub-basin under a range of different groundwater conditions. So using this dry well susceptibility analysis, we evaluated potential impacts to susceptible groundwater wells due to overdraft. And revised our minimum thresholds to be protective of domestic wells. So I see some changes in slides that I'll wait for us to land in the right slide. All right, okay, great. So we're talking about minimum thresholds and the upper aquifer water levels. And as I was mentioning, the minimum thresholds were revised to be protective of domestic wells going dry. What we show on the right is the potentially impacted domestic wells in the previous GSP and now with the current GSP on the right. And as you can see, these are significantly lower than the previous GSP. An important point to note is that the same analysis was conducted for the entire sub-basin. So we did not break it up by GSA. We were looking at the Kaweah Sub-basin as a whole. And this analysis also informed a basin-wide mitigation program, as well as the GSA-specific mitigation budgets and plans. Next slide. This map shows the regional groundwater levels representing our minimum thresholds with our existing monitoring network. Those dots are our monitoring network. As you can see, the minimum thresholds are consistent across the sub-basin, across GSAs. Groundwater conditions are different on the east, where conditions are much more shallow. There's a limited amount of saturated thickness in the aquifer, and in the west, where of course we have the upper and the lower aquifer and at much deeper groundwater levels. So as you can see, we have smoothly tied together these differing groundwater conditions in different parts of the basin to develop consistent basin-wide minimum thresholds. Another important point to note is that our declaration of undesirable results, the slide that we have seen previously, would occur much before these basin-wide minimum thresholds are reached. So the 17 RMS wells or 30 domestic wells going dry would occur much before we were to realize these basin-wide minimum thresholds. So these are really for us to monitor against and prevent in the future. Next slide. As I mentioned, the minimum thresholds are what we are trying to prevent. We do not expect the basin to reach these regional minimum thresholds. They are really episodic groundwater conditions that could be realized in one or more part of the basin for a few years. What we are managing the basin towards are our measurable objectives. This map shows groundwater levels for our measurable objectives. These groundwater levels for the measurable objectives are much higher than our minimum threshold and are even more protective of beneficial use and users than the minimum thresholds for the upper aquifer, while also providing operational flexibility so that the groundwater conditions could be managed between the measurable objectives and the minimum thresholds. We have a few animations here. I won't go into those details, but what's important to understand is that similar to the minimum thresholds, the measurable objectives also accounted for differences in groundwater conditions in the east and the west. And what we have here is a smooth map that accounts for the differences in groundwater conditions in the east and the west. Next slide. So mitigation is essential to our definition of undesirable results and sustainable management criteria. So I'll hand it over to my colleague Kate Pallas to talk about how we've developed our mitigation program.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. Kate Pallas, Senior Water Resources Scientist at Intera. And we're very happy to share that the Kaweah Subbasin GSAs have adopted the Kaweah Subbasin Mitigation Program and those 3 GSA specific mitigation plans. But before we go into more detail, would like to take a moment to express our gratitude to the Self-Help Enterprises team for patiently teaching us just how nuanced and challenging developing a mitigation program is, and for serving as our mentors and our implementation partners in this process. So to reiterate, we're talking about a program that is being implemented today, and it's funded by the GSAs. And as Abhi just shared before, each GSA has developed a funding mechanism designed to meet an annual mitigation budget, and that annual mitigation budget was directly informed from that dry well susceptibility analysis and assumes maximum mitigation award for all potentially impacted wells. So it's got a conservative buffer built in. Next slide.
Kate, can I remind you to talk a little
Yeah.
bit? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. The Kaweah Subbasin Mitigation Program provides solutions that meet emergency through long-term needs for households that have lost access to drinking water because of overdraft conditions. The mitigation program also resulted in the inception of 3 new management actions. You can click to show that animation. Thanks. That includes the Small Community Proactive and Protective Action Plan. That's a mouthful. The Well Registration Program, and the Domestic Well Permit Application Review Protocol. And all of these, more information on all of these are available in Chapter 6 of the draft GSPs that are available on each GSA's website. You can also find the mitigation program and each GSA specific mitigation plan also on the GSA's websites. Next slide.
There was probably like
Thanks. And now we'll hear from Derek, who's one of our subsidence experts, to talk about subsidence and then also that relationship between lower aquifer groundwater levels.
Thank you, Kate. The draft revised GSPs develop new subsidence limits that are both protective of all infrastructure and consistent across the basin. as Abhishek mentioned, land subsidence and lower aquifer groundwater level management criteria are related, and it's shown in this graphic. I'm going to start by talking about the steps we took to address land subsidence first, and then I will connect it to how the land subsidence drives the lower aquifer groundwater levels. Next slide. So one back, thank you. So to be protective, the GSAs identified all potentially impacted infrastructure. And this chart lists some of them, but importantly, the GSAs spoke with all the agencies that either own or operate these infrastructures to understand those agencies' concerns and to make sure that the limits on subsidence set by the GSAs are in line with what the various agencies want. Two infrastructures proved to be the most limiting for subsidence: the Frank-Kern Canal and flood control mitigation. In coordination with the Frank Water Authority, the GSAs agreed that no new subsidence is acceptable along the Frank-Kern Canal. The GSAs additionally agreed, in coordination with their neighboring subbasins, that no more than 7 feet of subsidence is acceptable in the western edge of the subbasin. This is to avoid any flood control issues and to make sure that all the subbasins in the area are coordinated in their flood control efforts. Next slide, please. The GSA's threshold of no new subsidence along the Frank-Kern Canal is consistent with historical subsidence rates. This chart shows that there's been no historical subsidence observed in the Kaweah subbasin along the Frank-Kern Canal. And this is consistent with our minimum threshold of zero subsidence. Not only is our minimum threshold of zero subsidence along the Frank-Kern Canal consistent with historical rates, it's also what the GSAs agreed to with the Frank Water Authority, and the GSAs are going to coordinate the subsidence monitoring with the Frank Water Authority to ensure that the Water Authority's expectations are being met along the canal. Next slide, please. So the undesirable result for land subsidence, it's when the cumulative subsidence minimum threshold is exceeded at any single representative monitoring site. This is more strict than the groundwater level undesirable results because land subsidence is irreversible. Groundwater levels can be raised again, but land subsidence cannot. And so the GSAs are taking a hard line. They're taking a very strict interpretation of what's undesirable, and any exceedance of minimum thresholds will be undesirable. Next slide, please. So based on the GSA's analysis of impact to infrastructure, the GSAs developed this map, which shows the maximum amount of future subsidence. These are basically the minimum thresholds. And the east, the right-hand side of this in yellow, is where the GSAs have set zero subsidence as their minimum threshold. The darkest green section in the southwest corner is where, in coordination with the Tule subbasin, the GSAs and the Tule subbasin all agreed that 7 feet of subsidence is the maximum allowable in that lower left corner. So there's different subsidence allowable across the basin, and the average subsidence minimum threshold will be 3.1 feet. So that's between now, actually between 2020 and 2022 and 2040, there will be on average no more than 3.1 feet of subsidence in the subbasin. We're going to be monitoring subsidence at all the dots that you see on this map using INSAR data from DWR. Next slide, please. The measurable objective, remember what Abhishek said, this is the goal that we're shooting for, and our measurable objective is no subsidence. Now that will be difficult to obtain. That'll be difficult to achieve, but it has to be our goal. The GSAs, as they collect more data, as they do more analysis, will always be looking for how do we minimize the subsidence? How do we get to zero subsidence if possible? It might not be possible, but it is the goal and the commitment the GSAs have made. Next slide, please. So the final DWR deficiency pertains to the relationship between different SMCs, and particularly the relationship between subsidence and lower elevation and lower aquifer groundwater levels. As Abhishek pointed out earlier, subsidence is the main undesirable result from low groundwater levels in the lower aquifer. So we're hooking those two things together. We're saying now that we've decided how much subsidence is unacceptable, we can establish how high we have to keep groundwater levels to prevent unacceptable subsidence. Next slide, please. Great. The undesirable result for lower aquifer groundwater levels is actually a two-part undesirable result. And the undesirable result occurs if both of these things happen. If the water level in a well drops below its minimum threshold, and we're seeing the subsidence that's associated with that. If the groundwater level drops below its minimum threshold and we're not seeing the subsidence, it doesn't mean we're not concerned. The GSAs are still working on it, but it doesn't mean it's undesirable, because it's the subsidence that is the definition of what's undesirable from these low groundwater levels. Next slide, please. The GSAs used a groundwater model, a one-dimensional groundwater model that relates groundwater levels to future subsidence. It predicts future subsidence at different groundwater levels. And they looked at a series of groundwater levels and chose the groundwater levels that would not introduce any undesirable subsidence. And this is a map of the groundwater levels. And it's a reasonable map. These are all only in the lower aquifer. And so we've set the groundwater levels now to be protective of all critical infrastructure and to avoid any land subsidence. It turns out that we're also avoiding any new subsidence. The subsidence that's in the basin that we're going to be seeing from now until 2040 is subsidence that's already baked into the system. And all the GSAs are doing is managing and minimizing that subsidence. Next slide, please. Again, there's a measurable objective, and this is our goal. We've been talking about minimum thresholds, which is the floor. Our goal is to raise water levels in the lower aquifer to 2012 water levels. And this is for a couple reasons. One, it gives us a goal that's higher than our minimum thresholds, a buffer that we can work within and a goal to strive for. Also, these water levels are always higher than the 2015 water levels. So the GSAs are striving to have, their goal is to have water levels that are higher and more protective than the water levels were when SGMA was initiated. The GSAs are shooting for a better condition than the beginning of SGMA. Next slide, please. And that's how the GSAs are addressing all the DWR deficiencies. I'm going to turn it back to Aaron Fukuda, and he can talk about the state board's new deficiencies.
Thank you. Next slide. So we broke down the DWR deficiencies and the state water resources deficiencies as reported in the draft staff report. And the elements here highlighted in green are what we've addressed in the June 13th revised GSPs that were submitted to the State Water Resources Control Board staff. We've already established technical teams to work on the groundwater quality and interconnected surface water elements and are working diligently. And we intend to collaboratively work with staff at the state board to address these concerns in the very near future. Next slide, please. So we do have a path to sustainability. Next slide. Our path has been set out with our landowners, our growers, and our interested parties. We've come a long way, but we still have a long ways to go. There's a lot of hard work that our GSAs and landowners have already done in establishing our path, and our management actions and projects have been accelerated to keep our path and our momentum going into the future. Because our goal is to reach our pinnacle, which is groundwater sustainability in 2040. Next slide. As was stated at the beginning of our presentation, our path was accelerated. We started to jog along that path, implementing projects and management actions early. Those are in green. And then investing in our next stages of implementation. Those are in blue. Those are funded and projects are beginning to be constructed as we speak. And so what's left for us is this small list in brown off to the right. And those are projects that we are now envisioning in the coming years. Next slide. So to evaluate our sustainability path, the Kaweah Subbasin GSAs have implemented a new mod flow model within the Kaweah Subbasin in partnership with Stanford University. This model implements a climate change projection along with all of our demand management and implemented projects and projects with timelines into the future. All of that data was input into the model, and 97 predictive models runs later, we were able to achieve sustainability. The hydrographs to the right here show an example of what that sustainability looks like in the groundwater levels. So you're seeing us achieve our measurable objective, which are those lightly dotted red lines on the hydrographs, and we're staying away from our minimum thresholds. Next slide. Most telling from our work and the collaboration with our technical teams of the 3 GSAs is what's indicated in our revised groundwater sustainability plan that the state board is now reviewing. It's that we achieve sustainability by 2040. As we move forward in time, what you will see is that our overdraft is reduced to 0 overdraft by 2040. And into the future, we have a slight surplus of groundwater coming into the subbasin. So as we implement our management actions and projects, we hope that we can continue this momentum and achieve groundwater sustainability. We look forward to collaborating with the State Water Resources Control Board and the staff, and we look forward to the public's interaction with us as we achieve our goals in the Kaweah Subbasin. Thank you very much, and we look forward to the questions.
Thank you to the Kaweah GSAs for providing that presentation for us today. Again, I'd like to remind you that you can reach out with questions on that presentation to Kate Pallas. Her email address is in the comment. Okay. We will now be transitioning to the public comment portion of today's workshop. As a reminder, you can mute and unmute yourself by using the microphone button in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And for those of you on the phone, you will use the *6
Recording stopped.
to mute and unmute. Written comments can also be submitted in the chat. To deliver verbal comment, please raise your hand using the raise hand function, and I will call on you in the order your hand is raised. Please ensure you are ready to come off mute when it is time for you to provide your comment. For the sake of time, and to allow adequate time for all the commenters, you will each have 3 minutes for your comment. If you would like to listen to the interpretation, please see the directions posted in the chat. I'd like to open up the floor to any commenters. Yes, I see Akash. If you'd like to unmute.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the opportunity to provide public comment. My name is Akash Singh, and I am speaking on behalf of the Union of Concerned Scientists. We support the Water Board's recommendations to put the Kaweah Sub-basin on probation and of not charging fees to domestic users who extract less than 2 acre-feet per year. Subsidence in the Kaweah Sub-basin is out of control, especially due to excessive pumping under the Corcoran clay layer. Most wells in Kaweah are either unprotected or not covered by monitoring, which puts them at risk of going dry even while maintaining current local groundwater threshold objectives. Kaweah has been able to recharge water in wet years, such as 2019 and 2023, but has not been able to control groundwater overdraft in dry years. It is not feasible to do aquifer recharge under the Corcoran clay layer in Kaweah, which means that the groundwater extracted under the clay layer cannot be replenished. This is why subsidence is still a major problem even in years without groundwater overdraft. The solution is repurposing agriculture to sustainable levels and limiting wells that extract water from under the Corcoran clay layer. The Kaweah Sub-basin and Tulare County have the worst subsidence in California. In a dry year like 2022, the soil in multiple locations sunk more than 1 foot. In a wet year like 2023, in which the aquifer replenishment was outstanding in the whole state, and some regions even experienced an increase in elevation, Kaweah still sunk. Subsidence is a major problem in the San Joaquin Valley, and the volume of water storage already lost to subsidence is several times larger than the volume of all the dams in the state. Furthermore, there is a need to understand better the needs of the disadvantaged communities that are located within the sub-basins region. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your comments. Okay, next in line, I see Tien Tran, and then after that, it'll be Jasmine Ramirez.
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to make a note that I'm going to be giving public comment, and then also my colleague is going to be giving public comment, so 2 separate ones, but with Community Water Center. So, hi, everyone. My name is Tien Tran. I am a senior policy advocate at Community Water Center. I've been tracking SGMA for the past 2 years now, and I also sit on the East Kaweah GSA Advisory Committee and just really appreciate the State Water Board for putting on this workshop and also hosting the one on Thursday, and also appreciate the Kaweah Basin for making their improvements to their plans. Since I've started at CWC, we've always had a very open line of communication and a culture of collaboration, and I really want that to continue as we continue to work on revisions and address the State Water Board's deficiencies. Overall, the basin is on the right track, and we just want to make sure that there are real revisions for groundwater quality. So until we can confirm that the Kaweah Sub-basin addresses all deficiencies, we support the board for designating the Kaweah Sub-basin as a probationary basin. We're concerned about the lack of revisions around groundwater quality, and we hope that the Kaweah Sub-basin can address it before the probationary hearing. But the reality is that people have experienced severe groundwater contamination, and it's only going to get worse if we don't act now. residents will be impacted immediately. And one example is that we work with the residents in West Goshen, which is part of the greater Kaweah GSA area. There were several wells that went dry during the 2012-2016 drought. And even when the wells weren't dry, they were facing groundwater contamination such as 123 TCP, nitrates, and hexavalent chromium, and also uranium. So the water was unsafe for them to drink, cook, and also bathe. We want to make sure that people can trust the water that comes out of their tap and that they're not afraid of getting sick by using that water. This is why the Kaweah Subbasin should adopt the recommendations by the State Water Board, such as removing the 10-year average, making sure that all the constituents that have been identified are monitored, and that domestic wells are properly represented in the monitoring network. Appreciate in closing and interested in continuing to work together with the State Water Board and the Kaweah Subbasin to make sure that groundwater quality is protected for all beneficial users. Thank you. And that's the end of my public comment, and I'll pass it to my colleague Delia, and that can start another timer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Deleo Garcia Lopez. I'd also like to thank the State Water Board and the Kaweah Subbasin GSA. Thank you all for your time and working to improve the deficiencies in communities here. The mitigation plan for the Kaweah GSA is one of the best that the CWC has seen, and we appreciate the improvements in the mitigation plan, especially in terms of prioritizing the community and transparency and active communication with those that rely on the GSA's subbasin. And active communication is vital to a program that focuses on underserved communities. And with that being said, the Community Water Center asks that the Kaweah GSA approves upon their small community wells and proactive action plan within their mitigation plan by clarifying the schedule of public outreach events and partnering with CBOs such as the CWC ourselves and the Leadership Council to aid in making the outreach process more accessible to the community. The Small Community Well and Proactive Action Plan is noted in the GSP as a voluntary well registration program. And if it is up to the community members, and if the onus is being placed on the community members to seek out this program and assistance, it is important that the trust and transparency is built through active communication, and that means being transparent about when meetings are done, when there is a schedule, and when and where they are allowed to attend and learn more to improve their access to sustainable water. So clarifying the specific outreach as a specific phase in the program and publishing an actively updated public schedule of outreach and community workshops will be a step in the right direction for building the trust in the public that the agency has highlighted as integral to eventual sustainability and trust with the community. Additionally, the CWC works with the Agua Coalition, which are community partners who advocate for the human right to water. They specialize in providing outreach to community members and making these processes that can sometimes be convoluted or full of jargon that community members may not be familiar with, making it more accessible to the public. Partnerships with us, the Leadership Council, or any other CBOs can help build trust and connections over time, and we can help make these outreach plans more accessible to the public and serve the purpose that they need to serve. In closing, the Community Water Center asks that you publish the schedule and plan for public outreach and partner with CBOs to increase the voluntary enrollment and trust in the Community Action Plan for the betterment of the community and communication and connection between the GSAs and the community that relies on you to provide sustainable water to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next up is Jasmine Ramirez.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine Ramirez. I am a Senior Community Development Specialist with Self-Help Enterprises working on SGMA implementation. And on behalf of Self-Help Enterprises, we would like to extend our gratitude for hosting this workshop and thank the State Water Board for their input thus far on plans and for the State Water Board's engagement and responses to our submitted comment letters to date. Safeguarding drinking water for communities stands as our organizational priority and lies at the core of the work that we do. And we look forward to working together to support these efforts. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Jasmine. Do we have any other commenters? I see Debbie's come off mute. Debbie Heath, would you like to provide a public comment?
Hi, yes, just very briefly, please, less than 3 minutes. We really so appreciate the self-help enterprise program. You guys, they've been such a great blessing to provide the water and the help in the community. We are shortly going to be getting a well dug here shortly in a little bit. I know and understand just a little bit about the monitoring of the water. We have 1 acre. I do have chickens. Are we going to be allowed at all to do any type of watering of our grass? Is my question. And thank you.
Okay. Seeing there are no hands raised, I'd like to offer somebody from the board to answer that question for Debbie.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Natalie.
Hi, yes, sorry, making sure I came off mute all right. Thank you for that question. So this answer, the GSAs may also want to jump in on here. At this time, board staff are recommending to the board, again, at this time before reviewing the updated plans, staff are recommending that the board place this basin on probation. Just referring back to the staff presentation, that means that board staff would be collecting groundwater extraction information from many people in the subbasin, but not all people. And those who are required to report unless they have a waiver would need to pay fees. There are no restrictions on water use during probation. If after a year things aren't resolved in a probationary basin, the board could consider whether to adopt an interim plan for the basin. That process would be very similar to a probationary hearing in which there's outreach, engagement, and a hearing before any adoption of a plan. That plan could potentially have groundwater extraction limitations. However, our goal right now is to work with the GSAs to review those new plans and revisit our recommendation to the board once we've reviewed those plans and continue working with the GSAs to get them back on track. Regarding those exemptions from reporting, in a scenario where a basin is put on probation, just a quick reminder that the exemption is for individuals who are pumping 2 acre-feet or less per year for domestic use only. So watering grass is most likely domestic use. For any other questions, please feel free to reach out. GSAs do have potential authorities, and so you may want to follow up with your local GSA to ask about their program as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for that question. Hey, do we have any other comments from the participants? Okay, I'm not seeing anything at the moment. I would like to offer the opportunity for any other questions. If, considering we do have some time, are there any other questions? I'd like to just hold this space for a couple more minutes, allow some time just in case people are gathering their thoughts. Okay, I am not seeing any comments or questions in the chat nor hands raised. So I think we'll move to closing. Okay. Let's see here. So I just would like to share the Kaweah schedule again. We are here at the public workshop. And we have another public workshop in Visalia on June 27th, and we welcome you all to join us there. Public comment period will run from May 6th to July 8th. And the final deficiencies and hearing will be in December and January. All right. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay. You also have the opportunity to provide written comments to the State Water Board via email, mail, or hand delivery. Contact information has been provided in the comments and can also be found at the Kaweah Subbasin webpage. Meeting materials will also be shared on the webpage. All right. I'd like to thank you all for taking your time to join today's public staff workshop of the Kaweah Subbasin. We hope it was informative for you all. Thank you to all of our presenters, both State Water Board and the GSA representatives, and for all of your continued work doing all your continued work on groundwater sustainability. Thank you so much and have a good day.